Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we talk about this. This is a French Infantry Officers Sabre, model 1882. You may find the name familiar if you don't already know it, because we actually mentioned it a few videos ago when talking about the Adjutant 1845 model. And that's because even though this was the standard infantry sword for the last part of the 19th century and up to and during World War I, a lot of soldiers preferred using the older model 1845. That is because the blade on the sword was considered too fragile for actual use, and the handguard did not provide enough protection. So what we're looking at today is perhaps a slightly controversial sword in the sense that it was not appreciated during its service life. And in a lot of cases, it's still not appreciated today. This is a kind of sword you can find really easily. There are a lot of them. Lots of times they're quite cheap. And it's a great time to be a collector of this specific model of sword. So if you like it, as I know some of you do, it's really one of the best kind of swords you can find just because it's abundant and cheap. But let's talk a little about the model in itself. So it was released in 1882. And unlike the model 1845 or 55, which had variations, for example, for NCOs and superior officers, like upper rank officers, the 1882 came in one version, one standard version for everyone. And you would have had this shell guard, this guard with three branches, a nickel-plated blade, a straight nickel-plated blade with a lenticular section. I'll look at all of that in detail in just a moment, and with offset fullers. Again, we'll see that in detail in just a second. The nickel plating was then substituted by a chrome plating, and then towards the end, I think in the production facility of Châtellerault, they started producing even non-treated versions of the blade. So some would be pure steel, and those are apparently the rarest to come by. So keep that in mind if you're diving into collecting these swords. As for most French swords, they would have had a whole bunch of maker's marks and proof marks. So usually you will find the usual Klingenthal, Culot, or Châtellerault. But that's not always the case, because you might also find maker's marks from furbishers and suppliers, like third-party suppliers, so you may find those. I suppose also there might be unmarked swords, because as happened very frequently with French weapons, officers personalized them and customized them in all kinds of ways. And this is especially common for the 1882 because, of course, I suppose upper rank officers would have wanted to distinguish themselves from NCOs, and since the standard issue did not account for that, they did it themselves. I don't know that officers could order their own blades. Normally, while the hilt could have been changed, the blade should have been the official state manufactured blade, but I'm pretty sure someone got creative and broke the rules on that too. So other details, the original length of the blade is 83 centimeters. That was the first iteration of the sword, but then 3 different sizes were issued moving forward. So you'll also find versions that are 90 centimeters, 85, 80, and 75. So you had like 4 sizes. In terms of variations on the hilt, there are, as I mentioned, all kinds of different variations. Some are elaborately decorated and worked. A lot of times the variations will come in the number and the position of these branches. You find versions with 5, 7, I think even 9 branches. This sword was also not only used by infantry officers, it was used by all kinds of units on foot. So infantry, engineers, colonial troops, zouaves, Republican guards on foot, chasseurs. So it had a very widespread use, which is probably why we see so many variations and why there are so many of them, making them so easy to come by and so affordable. In terms of its service life, we're talking initially released in 1882. Its main time of use was probably during World War I. And it was officially still in use in 1825. That's when it was decommissioned. However, it is still used, I think, it's part of the official uniform for firefighter cadets. So technically, life service is still ongoing. Well, with all that out of the way, let's look at its details. As a disclaimer, I haven't really cleaned or done anything to this blade after I bought it because I'm not really sure how to treat nickel-plated, damaged nickel plate, as you can see here. So there are a lot of ways you can treat it, and you can use some of the typical products like ballistol or polish compounds. But in some cases, as far as I've heard, these can creep underneath the damaged plating and then basically peel it off or damage it even more. So I want to avoid that. So I have to do some research before I can make this shine a little brighter than you see in this video. But let's start looking at the hilt. Standard, like by regulation, the hilt would be of white metal. I'm not really sure what that refers to. It could be, for example, some kind of metal, I don't know, or it could be some alloy such as German silver, as we mentioned, or a simple nickel plating maybe qualifies too, so I don't know. But if we look at it, it's rather simple. It's actually even rather elegant, so it's a shame that this sword was not so well received because it's actually quite beautiful. What we see is these 3 rounded branches that very softly connect to the crossguard here, to the hilt area. We see this upturned lip on the inside of the sword. And then we have the pommel, which is quite simple, slightly upturned, and with a few decoration lines here. So as I mentioned before, when we talk about customization, you would see versions of these with multiple extra branches, for example, or perhaps with some branches even on the inside, I think. If we look at the rest of the hilt, we see there's a full back strap with a ring here to keep everything in place. Although the back strap actually does not seem to go under the ring. If you see here, they're separated. So the back strap is kind of free floating here. Backstrap also has these 2 lines, kind of that's, I guess, the motif, decoration motif, as we've seen in the Quillen too. We come to the end here, the pommel area, and of course, there we see some dirt and grime, unfortunately, that will need to be cleaned. This is a peened blade. And here we have the point where it connects to the knuckle guard. So we have this little round section here where it inserts into the grip there. And then we have the hole here for the porte-épée. And a rather simple knuckle guard, but still quite elegant. So a very nice hilt overall. The grip is a bone grip. Sorry, horn grip. I already made that mistake once. I'll try not to do it again. So horn grip, you normally would have metal wire binding, but in this case, it's not there anymore. In place of the binding, we have a whole bunch of residue from what I think is brasso. And moving on to the blade, we still have, in this case, this one retains its washer, its leather washer, although it's perhaps not in the best condition. Oh, sorry about that. And we see lenticular blade, if anyone was wondering when I mentioned that before. It's kind of this oval section blade. So you'll see it fattens towards the center and then it goes back to thin. So kind of a rounded, almost a very flat oval shape to the section of the blade. It has a mark. This is the only mark there is on the blade. Sorry, on the sword, because there's no mark on the hilt either. And it's a Klingenthal mark, but the copywriters amongst you, or the content editors or proofreaders, may notice that there seems to be a typo there. So to me, it seems like Klingen, I don't know what that is. It doesn't look like a T, or there should be a T. It looks like an L perhaps, but even if it were a T, there's a typo for sure because the H is misplaced. It should come after the T and before the A. So it should be Klingenthal rather than Klingenthal. So someone someone did not really know what they were doing, or they might have been in a hurry, or I don't know what this could be. I've never seen a typo on a Klingenthal mark, but I mean, with all the blades that were made, I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't more. Now, moving forward on the blade, it's quite simple. We already saw that there's some damage to the nickel plating, so that's unfortunately what it is. When I mentioned before offset fullers, some of you may be wondering what that means. It means that there's a double fuller, but whereas in most blades, the fullers are symmetrical, so kind of they shave away an equal area of the blade. In this case, they're offset. So this one is more towards the bottom of the blade, and on the other side, it's more on the top. So if I flip this blade like this, you'll see what I mean. So if we look at the hilt, here it's on the top of the blade, the fuller, whereas when I turn it around, it's on the bottom. So it's almost, the section makes almost like an S, if that makes sense. This fuller runs, let me get it in focus. Fuller runs almost all the way to the top of the blade, to the tip of the blade, sorry. Here there's some weird paint residue, so you know that this sword was not kept with love and care, that's for sure. And it goes, as I mentioned, almost to the tip. Again, you see the offsetting. In this case, it ends right at the half, but on the bottom side of the half. And here it ends on the top side of the half of the blade. There's this end ridge that kind of meets at the middle, more or less, of the spear tip of the blade. This blade was meant for thrusting, so it had a pointy tip, but it was not usually sharpened. So this was not a blade meant for slashing. It wasn't a cut and thrust blade, it was a purely thrusting blade. So let me know, have you ever seen Klingenthal typos? Have you ever seen typos in general? Apart from the really old ones like Andrea Ferrara or those kinds of inscriptions, but have you seen typos on standard issue military swords? Let me know if you have. So I hope you enjoyed the video. While this model of sword may not have had the most amazing history in terms of combat and use, it's still a core part of sword history, especially when we talk about French weapons. So if you do have the chance to pick one up or handle one or own one, I definitely suggest you do. This one is, as you saw in the video, in rather rough shape. It needs some cleaning, which I'm gonna try and do as soon as possible. And in further videos, we're going to be looking maybe at this one again compared to some of the variations of 1882s that I mentioned. So stay tuned for those, and I'll see you soon with another sword video. Thank you for watching.